The meticulousness was a shield, a bulwark against the inherent chaos of the world. Every brush, every chisel, every solvent in my toolkit had its designated place, gleaming under the workshop lights. My hands, usually stained with patina and old varnish, were scrubbed clean, the nails trimmed short. I had spent the morning triple-checking the inventory, securing the antique clock I just finished restoring a Georgian long case, its mechanism now humming with quiet precision into its padded crate. My clients understood my exacting standards, even if they sometimes found my solitary dedication peculiar. I preferred the silent language of craftsmanship, the slow unveiling of beauty hidden beneath centuries of grime, to the unpredictable chatter of human interaction. The drive north was a study in methodical progression. The landscape blurred from manicured suburbs to sprawling farmland, then to something wilder, less tamed. The roads narrowed, winding like forgotten veins through ancient forests. The sky, a bruised purple-gray, pressed low, threatening rain. My estate car, packed with my essentials tools, a few changes of clothes, a well-worn copy of a treatise on timber preservation, felt like a sturdy, familiar shell against the encroaching desolation. I had inherited the manor from a distant relative I barely remembered, a man whose existence had been a faint whisper in my family's periphery. The solicitor had described it as a significant property, a euphemism, I suspected, for a colossal undertaking. As the GPS signal flickered and died, I navigated by instinct and a faded paper map, the kind that smelled of old attics and forgotten journeys. The final stretch was a rutted track, barely distinguishable from the surrounding undergrowth. Twisted oaks, their branches like skeletal fingers, clawed at the overcast sky. The air grew heavy, damp with the scent of wet earth and decaying leaves. Then through a break in the gnarled canopy, I saw it. It wasn't a house, it was a monolith of neglect. Gray stone, streaked with moss and lichen, rose from a sea of untamed foliage. The roofline sagged like a broken spine, and countless windows, dark and vacant, stared out like blind eyes. A formidable iron gate, rusted hinges groaning, hung askew, half-swallowed by ivy. The name, etched into a crumbling stone archway above the gate, was almost illegible, Blackwood Manor. A shiver, not entirely from the biting wind, traced its way down my spine. I pushed the gate open, the protesting screech of metal echoing unnaturally in the profound silence. The drive, once gravel, was now a mosaic of weeds and cracked flagstones. A sudden, jarring shift in my perception. A profound, bone-deep quiet settled, broken only by a faint, rhythmic drip somewhere out of sight. The stark, barren walls, the hushed echoes, the palpable weight of unseen eyes. This was the prison chapel after lights out, not a place I knew, not a memory I possessed, yet it was undeniably there, a fleeting, horrifying intrusion into my reality. The image was sharp, vivid, and utterly disorienting. Then just as quickly it was gone. The grand, decaying facade of Blackwood Manor solidified before me, the wind sighing through the broken eaves. My breath caught in my throat. What was that? A trick of the light? Exhaustion? My meticulous mind, usually so precise, struggled to catalog the anomaly. It felt like a premonition, a taste of something deeply unsettling. I approached the front door, a massive slab of oak, warped and pitted. The brass knocker, tarnished black, was shaped like a snarling gargoyle. I didn't bother using it. This was my house now, for better or worse. The air inside was stagnant, heavy with the dust of decades and the pervasive, cloying sweetness of decay. My first breath tasted like rust and forgotten things. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating a vast entrance hall. Cobwebs, thick and gray, draped from every surface like macabre tapestries. A chandelier, missing most of its crystals, hung precariously from the ceiling, a skeletal spider. It wasn't merely the absence of sound. It was a palpable presence, a weight that pressed against my eardrums, muffling my own footsteps. My gaze swept over the peeling wallpaper, the faded portraits with their milky, unseeing eyes, the intricate but crumbling plasterwork. This wasn't just neglect. It felt like a deliberate abandonment, as if the last residents had fled in haste, leaving behind a profound emptiness. My restorer's eye saw beyond the decay, glimpsing the bones of something magnificent, something that had once vibrated with life. But beneath that professional appraisal, a deeper unease began to settle. The manor felt less like an inheritance and more like a vast, silent maw waiting to swallow me whole. My determination, usually so unyielding, felt like a small, flickering flame against the encroaching gloom. This was going to be more than just a restoration. The manor house loomed, a skeletal hand against the bruised sky, but inside, I felt a familiar stir of purpose. My meticulousness, honed over decades of coaxing beauty from decay, was not just a habit. It was a ritual, a form of meditation. I'd chosen the old study as my first battlefield. Its grand oak paneling was warped, its once gilded edges tarnished, but beneath the grime I saw the ghost of its former glory. This was not merely a house. It was a vast, intricate puzzle, waiting for my hands to piece it back together. I began with the large, ornate writing desk positioned beneath a tall, leaded window. Its surface was a landscape of scratches, water rings, and layers of dust so thick they felt like velvet. My first task was always preparation, laying out my drop cloths, arranging my solvents in precise order, selecting the right brushes, the appropriate chisels. Each item had its place, a silent testament to control in a world that often felt beyond it. The silence of the house was profound, broken only by the rustle of my clothes, the soft click of a latch, the distant groan of the old timbers settling. It was a silence I usually relished, a canvas for my focused work. I started with a gentle cleaning solution, working in small, deliberate circles on a corner of the desk. A small victory. I reached for my specialized set of miniature picks, intending to meticulously clear the intricate carvings around the desk's apron. My hand brushed against the empty space where the smallest pick should have been. I frowned. I always kept them nestled in their velvet-lined barks in ascending order of size. This one, the finest, was missing, a fleeting annoyance. I must have misplaced it. I scanned the drop cloth, the desktop, the floor around my feet. Nothing. I sighed, attributing it to the unfamiliarity of a new workspace. I retrieved the next size up, a little too large for the task, but workable. As I bent over the desk, I heard a faint, metallic clink from behind me. I straightened, turning slowly. There, glinting innocently on the edge of the large oak desk, where I had just been working, was the smallest pick. It was laid out, not in its box, but flat against the wood, almost as if someone had placed it there for me. My brow furrowed. I could have sworn I'd checked that spot. My memory, usually a steel trap for such details, felt momentarily fuzzy. It was ridiculous. I was tired, perhaps. The move, the sheer scale of the manner. It was all a lot. I shook my head, dismissing the oddity, and resumed my work. Hours passed. I worked by the glow of a single powerful lamp, its beam cutting a bright circle in the encroaching gloom. It pressed in, amplifying every creak, every distant groan of the old house. I heard a sound then, distinct from the settling timbers. It seemed to emanate from the hallway just beyond the study door. I froze, my pick hovering above the delicate carving. I held my breath, straining to hear, just the hum of my lamp, the slow drip of a leaky faucet somewhere far off. My logical mind asserted it was the wind, perhaps, or a draft, but there was no wind that night, and the manor felt sealed, airtight in its decay. Still, the sound had been too specific, too close to a human utterance. I pushed back my chair, the scrape loud in the sudden quiet, and walked to the study door. I pulled it open, peering into the cavernous hallway. My skin prickled. I felt an undeniable shift in the atmosphere, as if the air itself had grown heavy, expectant. The memory, sharp and unwelcome, made my stomach clench. I retreated into the study, pulling the heavy oak door shut behind me with a decisive thud. The sound echoed, too loud, too final. My hands, which had been so steady moments before, now trembled slightly as I picked up my pick. My focus was shattered. It was too quick, too ephemeral to be real, just a trick of the light. A tired mind playing games. I told myself this, even as my heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I turned my head sharply, trying to catch it, but the space was empty, filled only with the faint, dusty glint of ancient leather-bound books. But the feeling persisted, growing stronger, more insistent. I was not alone. The meticulousness that usually anchored me, that allowed me to lose myself in the intricate details of restoration, was failing. Every nerve ending felt exposed, raw. I felt watched. The old study, with its grand skeletal remains of bookshelves and a fireplace choked with generations of soot, was a battlefield I understood. My tools, laid out with surgical precision on a drop cloth, gleamed under the temporary work lights. The air, thick with the scent of aged paper, and something else, something faintly metallic, like old blood or forgotten iron, was a challenge to my senses. a puzzle to be solved. I began with the wall paneling, a dark oak expanse that had once whispered of quiet scholarship, now groaning under the weight of time. My fingers, calloused and knowing, traced the intricate carvings, feeling for the subtle shifts, the almost imperceptible give that hinted at hidden mechanisms. I worked slowly, methodically, stripping away layers of grime and ancient varnish. Each stroke of the solvent-soaked rag revealed the wood's true grain. A small victory in the larger war against decay, hours blurred. The rhythmic scraping, the whisper of sandpaper, the soft thunk of a loosened nail, these were my only companions. It was behind a particularly ornate section, a relief carving of a snarling gargoyle, that I found it. My thumb, pressing against a floral motif at the gargoyle's base, felt a faint resistance, then a soft click. A narrow seam, almost invisible, appeared along the edge of the panel. My breath hitched. This wasn't just loose wood, this was deliberate. With a pry bar, carefully padded to avoid marring the ancient timber, I coaxed the panel open. It swung inward on stiff, rusted hinges, revealing not another room but a shallow cavity, perhaps a foot deep, stretching horizontally behind the wall. Inside, nestled on a shelf of rough-hewn stone, was a small leather-bound box, its surface cracked and flaking. It felt impassably old, a relic from a forgotten era. I pulled it out, setting it gently on my work table. The clasp was a simple, tarnished brass hook. It opened with a soft groan, revealing a collection of brittle, yellowed papers tied with a faded ribbon. Not a journal, but a series of handwritten notes, letters, and what looked like fragments of a ledger. The handwriting was spidery, almost illegible in places. I could make out dates, names, of an internal dissolution, a quiet unraveling of the self. The notes were not linear, jumping from date to date, person to person, as if compiled by someone struggling to maintain coherence. I read, my brow furrowed, the fine hairs on my arms prickling despite the warmth of the work lights. The descriptions were vague, alluding to a presence, an influence rather than a physical entity. It preyed on the mind, on identity. My meticulous nature, my reliance on order and facts, recoiled from the ambiguity, yet a morbid fascination held me captive. I looked up from the papers, intending to consult a reference book I'd left on a nearby cart. But when I turned, the cart wasn't there. My gaze swept the room, then back to the spot. It had been there. I distinctly remembered placing it, the heavy tome on top. A flicker of annoyance, a momentary lapse in my usual precision. Had I moved it, I couldn't recall. My mind felt like a skipping record, a momentary blank. I shook my head, attributing it to the late hour. The isolation, the sheer amount of dust I'd inhaled. This house was a drain, an old sponge soaking up my focus. I rubbed my temples, the strange, acrid smell from the hidden compartment still clinging to the air, or perhaps to my own clothes. The words from the fragmented notes echoed, the slow, creeping fog that steals what was. Nonsense. Just the ramblings of a troubled mind, amplified by the isolation of this decaying manor. I was tired, that was all. I gathered the papers, carefully placing them back in the leather box. The weight of the box felt heavier now, imbued with a sinister significance. I decided to call it a night, the day's discoveries having taken an unexpected toll. I needed rest, a clear head. Sleep, when it came, was not the restorative balm I craved. I was not in my bed, not in the manor. The air was thick with the metallic tang of old iron and something else, something cloying, like stale sweat and fear. My eyes, though heavy-lidded, were forced open, adjusting to the gloom. I was sitting on a hard wooden bench, my hands clamped together, my back aching against a rough stone wall. High above, narrow, grimy windows admitted no light, only a deeper shade of black. I could smell the damp earth, the faint, lingering scent of unwashed bodies, and something else, a faint, almost imperceptible sweetness that turned my stomach. This was a prison chapel after lights out. I knew it with an absolute, terrifying certainty, though I had no memory of how I'd arrived or why. I tried to move, to stand, but my limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. A profound sense of despair settled over me, not my own despair, but something borrowed, something ancient and deeply embedded in the very stones around me. I was not alone. The vast, empty space was teeming with unseen presences, their silent anguish a palpable weight on my chest. I wanted to scream, to tear myself free from this suffocating vision, but no sound would come. My throat was constricted, my mouth dry. This was not a dream. This was a memory, or something masquerading as one, burrowing deep into my mind, reshaping the very fabric of my perception. and something else. A faint, metallic tang, like old blood left to dry on iron, that no amount of open windows could dispel. I told myself it was the ancient plumbing, the oxidation of unseen pipes. But the rationalization felt thin, brittle. My work in the study was slow, methodical. I chipped away at layers of grime, revealing the dark, intricate patterns of the oak paneling, the ghost of a rich, deep burgundy beneath generations of dust. But as my hands worked, my mind raced. The manor felt restless. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of dry leaves against the window panes seemed to carry a weight, a whisper that wasn't quite sound. I needed context. I needed answers that went beyond plaster and timber. The next few days blurred into a solitary, obsessive hunt. I abandoned the restoration for the time being, the meticulous work feeling suddenly trivial in the face of this growing unease. I sifted through the manor's own meager collection of documents, ledgers, brittle letters, a few family portraits with unsettlingly blank eyes. When those yielded little, I drove to the nearest town, a sleepy place a dozen miles away, to its small, musty archive. Quiet. Quiet was an understatement. Local newspaper clippings from the late 1800s mentioned a sudden departure of a prominent family, their estate left vacant for years before another, equally ill-fated family took possession. A series of cryptic notices in the 1920s spoke of unexplained disappearances from the manor staff, dismissed as wanderlust or poor record-keeping. Later, in the 1950s, a brief article detailed the tragic decline of an owner, a respected historian, who was found wandering the grounds, speaking in an unknown language before vanishing completely. No body, no trace, just a blank space where a life once was. Each fragmented account was like a piece of a shattered mirror, reflecting only glimpses of a larger, uglier truth. The entity's presence, which had been a subtle hum, began to intensify, pressing down on me like a physical weight. My sleep became a battleground. One night, I found myself in a place utterly alien, yet terribly familiar. I was in a prison chapel after lights out. The air was thick with the scent of old stone, dust, and something cloyingly sweet like fading lilies. The silence was absolute, heavy enough to crush bone, broken only by the ragged rasp of my own breath. A single, cold stone altar stood at the front, stark and unadorned. I tried to move, but my limbs were leaden. Bound by an invisible force, I knew I wasn't alone. I could feel eyes on me, countless invisible eyes judging. I tried to remember why I was there, what I had done, but my mind was a fog. Names, faces, even my own history felt like wisps of smoke, dissolving before I could grasp them. I woke with a gasp, drenched in sweat, tangled in my sheets. It was like trying to recall a word that was just on the tip of my tongue, but perpetually out of reach. The waking hours offered little respite. The metallic scent from the study now seemed to permeate the entire manor, a constant, low thrum beneath my conscious perception. I found myself staring at a wall, certain I had just been doing something, but the task, the reason, had vanished from my mind. A tool would be missing from where I'd meticulously placed it, only to reappear in a completely different room, or sometimes not at all. One afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at a half-eaten sandwich. I remembered making it, bringing it to the table, taking a bite. Had I worked? Had I even left the study? The memory simply wasn't there, a gaping hole in the fabric of my day. I picked up my phone, intending to check the date to ground myself, but paused. What day was it? What month? My determination, my meticulous nature, my very sense of self, felt like sand slipping through my fingers. The fragmented accounts in the archive, disappearances, the madness. They weren't just history, they were a premonition, and I was living it. The brittle newsprint, yellowed and flaking, had felt like a tangible link to the past. Now the past felt like a suffocating shroud. I had been poring over the clippings, sudden departure, ill-fated family, the words blurring before my eyes, the familiar scent of old paper and dust filling my study. One moment, the dim light of my desk lamp illuminated the faded ink. The next, an absolute, profound darkness swallowed me. When my eyes finally adjusted, the air was not thick with dust, but with something colder, sharper, a scent like old stone, dampness, and a metallic tang that pricked at the back of my throat. The silence was different too. Not the quiet hum of the manor settling around me, but an empty, echoing vastness. My hands, which had been resting on the newspaper, now felt the rough, unforgiving texture of a narrow wooden bench. I sat bolt upright, my head hitting something hard and unyielding above. Stone, Faint, ghostly slivers of moonlight filtered through high, barred windows, illuminating the austere interior of what I immediately recognized as a prison chapel after lights out. How could I be here? My breath hitched. This wasn't a dream. My skin prickled, goosebumps rising. This place felt like a tomb. My gaze darted around, searching for an explanation, a door, anything familiar. But there was nothing but rows of these harsh wooden benches, their surfaces worn smooth by countless forgotten occupants, all facing the empty space where a pulpit once stood. Are I certain? I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to anchor myself to fight through the disorienting haze. I was an antique restorer. I lived in the manor. I was restoring it. This was a nightmare. This had to be. When I opened my eyes, a faint, translucent shimmer hung in the air directly before me, coalescing into a vague, humanoid form. It pulsed, a slow, malevolent rhythm, and from within its indistinct form, images began to flicker. I saw the manor, but not as I knew it. It was decaying, yes, but alive in its decay, its windows like hungry eyes, its timbers like grasping fingers. Then the images shifted, coalescing into faces. Faces from the newspaper clippings. A delicate woman, her mouth open in a silent scream. They weren't just images. They were impressions, feelings, and I am forgetting too. A wave of profound disorientation washed over me. I tried to remember the name of the last book I read, the color of my own eyes, the specific scent of the oak staircase in the manor. My mind felt like a sieve, letting essential details slip away, replaced by a growing emptiness. My hands went to my temples, pressing hard, as if I could physically hold my memories in place. The entity's form seemed to grow, its edges sharpening, though still translucent. It bent towards me, and I felt a pressure, an invisible hand pressing down on my chest, stealing my breath. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen malice. I came seeking their memories. The rasping voice continued, filling the chapel, reverberating off the cold stone. But they are not for I to find. They are for I to become. Then, a mirror image appeared within the entity's form, or perhaps it was my own reflection. Distorted and horrifying. My hair streaked with gray I didn't recognize. My hands trembling and skeletal. It was the face of the patriarch from the clippings, superimposed over my own, staring back at me from a place of utter despair. The identity of another slowly, sickeningly taking root in my own mind. I screamed, a raw, ragged sound torn from my throat. My own name felt foreign on my tongue. Who was I, Reed, or the forgotten occupant trapped in this eternal, silent chapel, my sense of self frayed, unraveling like a threadbare cloth. The edges of my perception blurred, the cold stone of the chapel bleeding into the familiar walls of the manor. Was I truly here, or was I still in my study, the clippings dissolving into a nightmarish hallucination, the world tilted, threatening to swallow me whole into its manufactured delusion? I had to hold on to something, to anything, the face, my face, but not mine. A skeletal mask of dread, eyes wide with a terror that felt both alien and horribly familiar. The Patria. The word echoed, a hollow clang in the cavern of my mind, and I stumbled back from the entity's shimmering form. I had to leave. The thought was a desperate, urgent drumbeat against the inside of my skull. This place wasn't merely old or forgotten, it was actively malevolent, a living, breathing, more devouring memory and sanity. My sanity. My breath hitched. A ragged sound in the cavernous hallway. I turned, my gaze darting to the heavy oak front doors. My legs, suddenly leaden, protested with every step, but I pushed through the growing numbness, the insidious fog that seemed to thicken around the edges of my thoughts. Each footfall on the polished floorboards was a thunderclap in the profound stillness. I twisted, pushed, pulled. Nothing. The doors remained stubbornly shut, as if fused with the frame. I threw my weight against them, grunting with effort. The old wood groaning in protest, but not yielding. My phone. It was in my pocket, a lifeline. I clawed it out, my fingers clumsy. The screen was a black mirror, reflecting my own frantic, wide-eyed face. I pressed the power button, then again and again. Dead, of course. It had been fully charged just hours ago. The entity or the manor was cutting me off. I remembered the old landline, a relic in the study, its rotary dial an anachronism. Hope, fragile and desperate. Flared, the air grew heavy, thick with the scent of dust, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old, dried blood. The study door was ajar. I pushed it open, the hinges groaning like a dying man. The phone, a black behemoth, sat on a side table. I jammed my finger into the dial hole for 0, spinning it with frantic energy. The mechanism whirred, a dry, mechanical cough. I waited, my ear pressed to the receiver. Not even a dial tone. My hand began to tremble, the phone threatening to slip from my grasp. The isolation was absolute, a suffocating blanket woven from the manor's ancient stones. A sudden, jarring shift. The floor beneath my feet was no longer polished wood but rough, uneven flagstones. I blinked, my vision swimming, trying to reconcile the impossible transition. I was no longer in the manor. A single, tall, arched window, high above, offered a sliver of weak, milky moonlight that did little to dispel the profound gloom. How had I gotten here? My mind raced, clawing at the edges of a memory that refused to form. I had been in the study trying to call for help. Then, this. The sheer impossibility of it was a physical blow. Was this the manor's final trick? Or was it my own mind, finally fractured beyond repair, constructing this elaborate, terrifying delusion? My breath plumed faintly in the frigid air. Each pew was worn smooth in places, polished by countless anonymous hands. My fingers brushed against something rough, a crude etching on the backrest of a pew near the front. I leaned closer, straining my eyes in the faint light. It was a drawing scratched deep into the aged wood, a face, and beneath it a single word, carved with a savage, desperate hand, Patria. The revelation struck me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just a delusion, it was a manifestation. The entity, the Patria, was not confined to the manor nor to the past. It had been here before, perhaps with others. This place, this prison chapel, was another one of its haunts, another stage for its slow, agonizing consumption of identity. The crude carving was a testament, a forgotten cry for help from a previous victim, one who had also seen their own face twisted into the entity's horrifying visage. I was trapped, not just by walls or locked doors, but by the very fabric of my perception. The manor, the chapel, my own memories, all were dissolving, shifting, becoming instruments of my torment. The outside world helped escape. They were distant, impossible fantasies. The cold, unforgiving bite of the stone floor seeped through my thin trousers, a jarring anchor to a reality I couldn't quite grasp. My eyes, heavy and gritty, peeled open to the oppressive gloom of the prison chapel after lights out. How I came to be here, I couldn't say. The last thing I remembered was the shimmering skeletal horror of my own reflection, the word Patria echoing in the cavern of my skull, and the crushing weight that followed. My breath hitched, a shallow, rattling sound in the vast chamber. My hands, calloused from years of delicate restoration work, felt alien, heavy. The memory of that face, my face yet utterly not mine, clawed at the edges of my mind. It was a mask, a veneer of my identity stretched thin over something ancient and ravenous. The chapel smelled of old dust, damp stone, and something else, a faint, metallic tang that prickled the back of my throat. I pushed myself up, my muscles aching, a phantom tremor running through my frame. This place, stripped bare of any comfort, became a crucible for a truth I had been desperately avoiding. The Patria. The word resonated again, not as a clang, but as a deep, resonant hum within my bones. It wasn't a place, I suddenly understood with a sickening clarity. It was a state of being, and it was hungry, not into a linear narrative, but into a horrifying tapestry of understanding, woven with the threads of my own fraying sanity. The entity, the thing that had haunted the manor for centuries, was not a ghost or a demon in the conventional sense. It was something far more insidious, more primal. It was the accumulated consciousness of every soul that had ever succumbed within those walls. It was the Patria, the collective memory, the ancestral identity harvested and absorbed. It wasn't just feeding on memories, it was consuming the very essence of identity. It didn't want a life, it wanted the experience of a life. Every thought, every feeling, every unique facet of a person's being was digested, assimilated, becoming another facet of its own monstrous, ever-expanding awareness. The manor was its shell, its physical manifestation, a vast, complex organism designed to lure, to trap, to consume. The restoration work I had so meticulously undertaken, the uncovering of its secrets, had not been an act of preservation, but an unwitting act of feeding. Each memory I unearthed, each forgotten detail I brought to light, had made it stronger. It didn't just passively wait, it actively manufactured delusions, subtly shifting reality, blurring the lines, making its victims doubt their own perceptions until they were ripe for the final absorption. The skeletal face I had seen was not a simple reflection of its form, but a composite, a terrifying mosaic of all the identities it had devoured. It wore them like trophies, like masks, each one a testament to its power, each one a flicker of a stolen soul. It demanded not blood, but being. The ultimate sacrifice was not death, but the obliteration of self, to become a voice in its chorus, a face in its endless gallery, an echo in its vast echoing mind, to exist but not as I, to have my unique existence folded into its grotesque tapestry, my memories becoming its memories, my identity dissolving into the collective patria it had become. My stomach churned with a primal revulsion that went beyond fear. This wasn't about survival, it was about preservation of the self, my own self. Reed, the antique restorer, the man who loved the quiet precision of his craft, who cherished the tangible history of objects. All of that, everything that made me me, was what it craved. It didn't want to kill me, it wanted to become me, to add my distinct flavor to its monstrous palate. I could feel the tendrils of its influence even here away from the manor. I closed my eyes, clenching my fists until my knuckles were white. The truth, finally laid bare, was worse than any nightmare. It wasn't a curse to be broken or a demon to be banished. It was a parasitic consciousness, ancient and insatiable, and it wanted everything. It wanted Reed. I would not become another face in its horrifying collection. I would not surrender myself. The chapel, a place of confessions and last rites, now felt like a crucible for a different kind of resolve. I had to fight, not just for my life, but for the very concept of me. A distant clock chimed, its sonorous boom echoing through the stone halls, marking the passage of time I might not have. My eyes, heavy and gritty, peeled open to the oppressive gloom of the prison chapel after lights out. Somewhere, my head throbbed, a dull, insistent drum against the inside of my skull. Who was I? Reed. That was the name that clung, a desperate burr on the ragged fabric of my consciousness. Reed the restorer. What did I restore? Dust. Echoes, a house. Whose house? Mine. No, not mine. Not anymore. A faint, acrid scent, like old iron and wet stone, hung in the air, a familiar perfume of decay that somehow felt wrong in this particular space. My fingers, numb and clumsy, scraped against the rough flagstones as I tried to push myself upright. The effort was immense, each muscle protesting with a dull, persistent ache that radiated from my joints. My gaze snagged on a section of the wall, where the mortared stones seemed to shift, subtly. A trick of the failing light, or something more insidious. I crawled towards it, my knees grinding against the gritty floor. My fingers, surprisingly steady despite the tremor that ran through my frame, traced the rough surface. There, beneath layers of grime and ancient plaster, were faint incisions. Not graffiti, not casual marks. Symbols, crude, deep, etched with something sharp and unyielding into the very fabric of the building. They coiled and tangled. A visual snarl of lines and hooks, their edges softened by centuries of neglect. This place, this chapel, it wasn't just a part of the manor. It was a lock, a cage, and then a memory not my own, but a phantom echo washed over me. A desperate, terrified whisper in a language I didn't know, but understood with a chilling clarity. The entity fed on memories, on identity. My own mind was a testament to its voracious appetite, a shattered mosaic of half-truths and forgotten moments. What if it could be overwhelmed? What if it could be given something so vast, so potent, so utterly singular that it would choke on it? Not my memories. My memories were fractured, fragmented, useless now, too scattered for any coherent offering, but a memory. A constructed one. A cage for a predator built from the very thing it craved. The symbols on the wall. They were a key, a way to bind, to contain, to channel. The chapel, a place of isolation, of forced contemplation, was not just a building. It was an instrument, a conductor. Its very architecture, the stark, unadorned stone, the high, vaulted ceiling that seemed to pull all sound upwards, made it a vessel. And I, Reed, could be another. My sacrifice. This was the core of it. I had to become the lure. I had to empty myself deliberately of all that remained of Reed. The restorer, the man who remembered a mother's laugh, the scent of linseed oil, the specific grain of a certain mahogany. I had to become a blank slate, a vessel. Then I would fill that vessel with a single, overwhelming thought, a memory designed not to be consumed piecemeal, but to trap. This memory wouldn't be mine. It would be a construct, a powerful, singular focus. The idea was a jagged shard of glass in my mind, painful but brilliantly clear. I would create a false self, a simulacrum of identity stripped bare of personal history, yet vibrant enough, potent enough to draw the entity's attention. And into that simulacrum, I would pour one undeniable truth: this place is a prison. The entity would feast on it, thinking it was consuming a new identity, a fresh set of memories, but it would be consuming its own trap. They weren't just carvings. They were the binding, the lock, the circuit. I would complete that circuit, become the conduit. The prison chapel would be the trap's mechanism, and I, the bait, the lure, the final, desperate key. The price, all that remained of me. My identity, my memories, the very essence of Reed would be extinguished, either by the entity's consumption or by my own deliberate act of emptying myself to become the bait. The air in the chapel seemed to thicken, pressing in, as if sensing the magnitude of my decision. It was not heroism. It was desperation. I would give it something to choke on, even if it meant my final breath would be the sound of my own self being erased. The plan was forged, terrible and precise, in the crucible of a mind already teetering on the brink. I looked at the ancient symbols, then down at my trembling hands. I had to prepare. I had to make ready for the ultimate emptying. The air in the prison chapel after lights out was a thick, cold blanket, pressing down with the weight of forgotten prayers and unspoken despair. I could taste the dust, the faint, metallic tang of old iron, and something else, something ancient and hungry, stirring in the deepening quiet. My breath plumed white in the gloom, a fleeting ghost against the permanent shadows. This was it, the culmination of everything. My hands, steady despite the tremors that wanted to shake my core, traced the final, intricate lines of the carvings on the altar stone. They weren't just symbols, they were the circuit, the binding, the lock. I was about to become the conduit, and this chapel the trap's final chamber. I felt the shift before I saw anything, a subtle vibration in the very stone beneath my worn boots, a hum that resonated not in my ears, but in my bones. It was like the world itself was taking a deep, shuddering breath. It was testing me, a prelude to the feast it believed was coming. "I am Reed," I murmured, the sound thin but resolute in the vastness. I pressed my palm flat against the central carving, the one I'd meticulously restored, the final piece of the puzzle. It felt like my very essence was being drawn out, a siphon opening. Then the assault began. It wasn't physical, not in the way a fist or a blade would strike. It was far more insidious. Images flickered at the edge of my vision, a woman's face, warm and kind, her laughter like wind chimes. My mother. But the details blurred, her features dissolving, her voice becoming a static hiss. The entity was trying to consume her, to make her vanish from my mind, to sever that foundational connection. Panic clawed at my throat, but I fought it down. This was the plan. This was what I'd prepared for. The entity shifted tactics. Who are I, Reed? A restorer of forgotten things? A ghost in a decaying house? What defines I when everything I touch turns to dust? My memories began to unravel. Not just individual faces, but entire periods of my life. My first apprenticeship, the scent of linseed oil and old wood, the satisfaction of bringing beauty back to a broken artifact. It became a jumble of indistinct shapes and meaningless gestures. My triumphs, my failures, the quiet moments of joy, the sharp pangs of regret, they all started to blur into a featureless gray. It was like someone was systematically erasing pages from my personal history book, leaving only blank, brittle sheets. A profound emptiness threatened to swallow me whole. If I couldn't remember my past, how could I be me? Who was this man standing in the prison chapel after lights out, his hand pressed against cold stone? Was I merely a collection of borrowed experiences, a phantom waiting to be absorbed? I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing myself to recall the feeling of the carvings, the purpose behind them. I had spent weeks, months, painstakingly rebuilding them, not just with my hands, but with my mind. I remembered the intricate geometry, the precise angles, the way each line connected to the next, forming a complete, unbreakable whole. That was my work. I mend. The entity roared, a soundless scream that vibrated through my very bones, shaking the chapel. It was a roar of frustration, of pure ancient rage. It had expected an easy meal, a simple absorption. Instead, it was meeting resistance, a core of identity it couldn't simply erase. It threw everything at me then. My greatest fears manifested as fleeting, grotesque visions, the manor collapsing around me, burying me in its decay, my own reflection staring back, but with eyes that were not mine, a smile that was too wide, too hungry. It tried to trick me into believing I was the entity, that I had always been this consuming hunger, this ancient malevolence. You are nothing, you are a vessel, the circuit, I was completing it. I wasn't just a conduit, I was the switch, and the switch was flipping. It was the energy of the entity itself, redirected, bound. The carvings glowed faintly beneath my hand, a network of pale, pulsing lines. The pressure eased. The phantom images vanished. My memories, though still fractured and raw, began to reassert themselves, like scattered fragments slowly drifting back into place. My mother's face, clearer now, her laughter a faint, sweet echo. My hands, calloused and skilled, the tools of my trade. I was Reed, scarred, exhausted, but Reed asterisk. I pulled my hand away from the altar stone. The chapel was silent, utterly, completely silent. The entity was gone, not destroyed perhaps, but trapped. Bound within the very structure it had sought to corrupt. Imprisoned by the intricate patterns of its own intended feast. It had consumed its own trap. I stood there, trembling not from fear now, but from the sheer, bone-deep exhaustion of the battle. My identity, my very self, had been on the brink of erasure, and I had pulled it back piece by agonizing piece. The silence was absolute, a heavy velvet blanket. But beneath it, I could hear something else, faint but distinct, the steady, unwavering beat of my own heart. It was a sound I had almost forgotten, a testament to the fact that I was still here. I was still me.